I'll be taking a look at the career of a man very much responsible for a seamless blend of animation and live action. Richard Williams. One of the greatest animation directors of all time, he was somebody with an impressive eye for talent and always looked to push the art form further. While most animators try to join existing animation studios when they start their careers, Richard Williams actually started off independently, and it wasn't too long until he secured his first success with a fantastic short, The Little Island, in 1958. With an impressive use of color, Williams presented an incredible look into the mindsets of three different personalities, each representing good, truth, and beauty, as they try to prove their case to the others. It's a very thoughtful short, and an interesting insight into the human psyche, and shows how middle grounds are more important than the extremes. However, he manages to convey this in a subtle way that certainly makes one think while watching it. The attention garnered from The Little Island allowed him the opportunity to not only work on a couple more shorts, but he designed the opening titles for a number of films during the 60s and 70s. His work on the openings for Casino Royale and What's New Pussycat are easily the best parts of those dud comedies, showing a great sense of color and creativity. Williams even directed the titles for two of the Pink Panther comedies, which took a different approach to animation as they were done in 24 frames rather than the standard 12 frames of animation. The fluidity of the Panther's movements is incredible and showcases Williams' attention to detail and perfectionist nature really well. He even continued the Pink Panther association by doing commercials with the character. In fact, Williams and his studio did a lot of animation for a number of commercials, including ones for Fanta, Heinz, Kellogg's, and many others.
Boy, these Frosties are going really fast. They're great!
First class, Tony!
Tickets, please.
It's Tiger Man! Help!
Yikes!
Achoo!
Only Kellogg's Frosties have the secret formula that makes them
Great! Tiger Man needs more training. They're great!
He even did an advertisement for Care Bears, and I feel this 30-second spot is actually better animated than the theatrical release now by films.
I'd like to go somewhere.
You need a caring bear. If you open the cover and take my hand, we're off to the Care Bear land. Here's Friend Bear and Wish Bear, Good Luck Bear, and me. Yes, Grumpy, and Love a Lot we'll see. Sharing feelings and adventures, together we'll roam.
Timothy.
Then just close the cover, and we're home.
Where were you? With a friend.
the Care Bear books.
New from the people at Parker Brothers.
That's right, a 30-second promo featured stronger animation than the whole of an entire trilogy of cinematic adventures. That is how good of an animator Richard Williams is. Soon he was selected by Chuck Jones to direct a television special based on Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. And while this story has been done to death, I think Williams' version is one of the best takes. As expected, the animation is expertly done, with the ghost of Jacob Marley quite possibly as spookiest, and it manages to hit the necessary gravitas. While we know the obvious beats of the story, Williams keeps things interesting in how he develops Scrooge, and come the holiday season, his A Christmas Carol is definitely worth seeking out. This special was even good enough to get a theatrical release, which earned Richard Williams his first well-deserved Academy Award. He was soon hired to direct Raggedy Ann and Andy, a musical adventure, and while working with a rather messy script and underwhelming songs, he managed to bring together some of the best animators, either at the start or end of their careers, to work on the animation. While I don't have the highest opinion of Raggedy Ann and Andy as a whole, the animation is absolutely fantastic, with some complicated shots a wonder to behold in how they brought them to life. The most impressive is the greedy monster, which puts itself into all shapes and sizes, and a huge credit goes to former Disney and Warner Brothers animator Henry Hawkins for his work on the character. So important was the animators of the film that rather than the actors, the animators are credited alongside the characters in the opening titles, a practice Disney would not do until the early 1990s. Other big names who contributed to Raggedy Ann and Andy include veterans like Art Babbitt, Gerald Podton, Irv Spence, and Grim Natwick, in addition to then rookies such as Eric Goldberg, Tom Cito, John Kimball, David Block, and Michael Sporn. That's a great who's who list of major animators, and them hired on this project showcases Richard Williams' impressive eye for talent. And if Williams were left to his own devices and not forced to the script, this would have been a much better film. Later, he directed the television special Ziggy's Gift, based on the comic strip character, and centered around a happy man who is unable to see the cynicism and commercialism of the holiday season. It's a sweet story with some strong human commentary, but the animation is very impressive with something on a television budget. There's a smoothness and fluidity to the character animation far ahead of what was being done at the time, as television producers had the tendency to cut the budgets of animated shows in half. Finally came one of Richard Williams' biggest achievements, when Robert Zemeckis and Steven Spielberg contracted him to direct the animation for Who Framed Roger Rabbit. While it wasn't the first film to mix live action with animation, it was the first to really get a sense that cartoon characters were actually interacting with real people, and Williams was very instrumental in that. An unwritten rule was that the camera had to stay still, but he felt that was simply laziness, and the book was practically thrown out when working on Roger Rabbit. Zemeckis shot the film with the camera angles and movements he wanted to make, and Williams succeeded in putting Roger, Jessica, and the rest of the tunes seamlessly into the film. While it was obvious Donald Duck wasn't in the same plane of existence as Carmen Miranda's sister in The Three Caballeros, it actually felt like Bob Hoskins was pulling on Roger's ears on the set of Roger Rabbit. And even though we have since had similar attempts to utilize the same techniques in the likes of Cool World, Space Jam, and Looney Tunes Back in Action, even with their advanced technologies, I don't think they reached quite the same level of interaction we saw between Hoskins and Roger. It was an incredible achievement, and for his efforts, Richard Williams won 2 Academy Awards, including a Special Achievement Award for his direction. While Richard Williams was working on a lot of these projects, he was also developing and making a film that he spent over 20 years making, only to have it taken away from him at the tail end of production. That project was The Thief and the Cobbler. Since 1964, he'd been working on and off on this ambitious animated tale that would truly advance and change the medium in major ways and elevate it to a further art form. He hired major animators like the aforementioned Art Babbitt and legendary Wile E. Coyote animator Ken Harris to work on it, and he was even done in the widescreen CinemaScope process. In addition to evoking the beauty of Persian architecture and art styles, the silent lead characters were to be an homage to silent comedians like Charlie Chaplin, who were major influences on Williams. However, problems kept arising, as Williams would keep going over budget and running out of funds. So he would take on the commercials and the likes of Raggedy Ann and Andy in order to get the money, and he would plug away at it for a long time. However, he encountered additional problems, as the script was constantly being rewritten, character names were changed, and scenes were continually restructured. The Thief and the Cobbler spent so much time being made that Williams' son, who wasn't even born when the production began, eventually became a lead animator on it. However, a ray of hope came in the late 80s when producer Jake Eberts agreed to provide $10 million for the budget, and following the success of Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Warner Brothers agreed to distribute and fund the finished film. Sadly, issues arose when Williams was late in completing a work print for the WB executives by their requested deadline, not helped by his dislike of doing storyboards. The Warner execs were unimpressed and backed out, which led to The Thief and the Cobbler being handed over to another company, who pushed Williams off of his pet project and replaced him with Fred Calvert. The film was ultimately butchered by adding unnecessary and uninspired songs, a voice was given to Tack, the silent cobbler, whole moments were cut, and worst of all, the newly animated scenes very obviously paled in comparison to the ones done by Williams' crew. Ultimately, this version, titled The Princess and the Cobbler, was released in Australia in 1993. However, our story does not end there. In 1994, Miramax bought the film and added further distracting elements. In addition to further cutting and renaming it Arabian Night, Jonathan Winters and Matthew Broderick were brought in to overdub The Thief and the Cobbler, with the new writers giving the latter redundant dialogue and the former unfunny one-liners and pop culture references, as an obvious attempt to repeat the success of Disney's Aladdin. In fact, some of the crew on that film actually took a bit of inspiration from The Thief and the Cobbler, with a couple of animators even having worked on both features. It's somewhat tolerable if you look past the new voices and songs, but it's not Richard Williams' vision, and it's no surprise that he subsequently retired after working so many years on a project that was so butchered. Animation fans wondered when the true version of The Thief and the Cobbler would ever be seen. Roy Disney actually expressed interest at some point, but it ultimately never amounted to much. However, a dedicated fan decided it was about time the world saw Williams' vision and began assembling the recobbled cut, using the work print and other materials he could find to edit together. This garnered enough attention that the animators began sending in their discarded work and storyboards in order to finish this assignment. Somebody even managed to find an entire reel of footage in a Warner executive's office, and because of the influx of new material being sent, he's now on his 4th cut of the film. And honestly, the recobbled cut completely tops the theatrically released versions in every area. Despite the unfinished animation and storyboards, you can see so much of the artistry on the screen, and the comedy is so great without annoying voiceovers inserted in there. I think if Williams was allowed to finish the film the way he intended, it would have been a masterpiece, and definitely left a major impact on the art of animation, much in the same way the likes of Snow White, Beauty and the Beast, and Toy Story have. It's widely available online to watch, including on Garrett Gilchrist's official YouTube channel, The Thief Archive, which is the best place for Richard Williams material on the internet. Richard Williams is one of the masters of animation and so influential that almost every professional and amateur has studied his animator's survival kit. And recently he announced plans to make a new animated film, and hopefully its production runs more smoothly than The Thief and the Cobblers did. Needless to say, I'm very excited about it and any other projects Williams makes in the future.